Yeah, thanks, Josh. I'm Felix, Felix Clack on the internet. Yeah, I'm come here from London to talk to you about teaching. I'd like to do a slight detour, if you don't mind, and tell you about something that kind of inspired me to teach more. And on the 5th of May in 2009, I was walking through an airport. You know, you stop by a bookshop on your way to holiday, you're looking for something good to read, and I'm just perusing the bookshelves. I came across this book called The Gift. It's by a guy called Lewis Hyde. I guess it's relatively old, sort of 20, 30 years old. And essentially, it's an anthropological study of gift economies. Now, this kind of sounds really off-topic at the minute, and, you know, probably sounds like, you know, a really boring holiday read, right? But it was a good book, and there was one thing kind of stuck out to me, and that's what I want to talk about today. You see, I believe in the creative power of what we do as developers. You know, as Cameron mentioned this morning, we do more than just bash out some functional piece of work, right? We're not just, you know. In fact, you know what? We make stuff even if it's not quite real. But we're still making stuff, creating things out of nothing. And, you know, I believe that there's a craft to what we do. You know, it's not just, like I said, it's not just a, you know, that kind of I do X and do Y and Z. But I think really we take this thing, what we do, as an important craft. I sometimes wonder, though, where does craft become art? You know, there's a point, right? Think of a painter. I've got a friend, he's a decorator. He also paints art. And it's interesting that he does the same motion, right? It's the same materials. But what's different from when he paints a room to when he paints on canvas and creates this piece of artwork is the response. It's not the actual paint or anything like that makes the art, right? So, you know, I think maybe I'm getting a bit self-indulgent with this, but I believe kind of almost code can straddle that line between craft and art. And I say this because in the book, it talks about a transformational gift, and it uses art as an example. I'm going to read, if you don't mind, I'm going to read something to you, and everywhere I say artist, I'd like you to replace that with developer in your head. And everywhere I read art, I'd like you to replace that with code. And so here goes. It says, most artists are brought to their vocation when their own gifts are awakened by the work of a master, converted to art by art itself. The future artist is moved by a work of art, and through that experience comes to labor in the service of art until he can profess his own gifts. Those of us who do not become artists approach it in a similar manner, hoping to revive the soul, and any artist whose work touches us earns our gratitude. Between the time a gift comes to us and the time we pass it along, we suffer gratitude. With gifts that are agents of change, it is only when the gift is worked in us that we can give it away again. Giving the gift is the end of the labor and the act of gratitude. Transformation is not complete until we give. Once we have done this, we may feel a lingering and generalized gratitude, but we won't feel the urgency of true indebtedness. So, it's a little grandiose in its language, and I don't know, I feel like I've experienced these three stages. And, you know, the concept of, I love that line, you know, converted to art by art itself. For me, that was kind of my experience, converted to code by code itself. You know, you saw that piece of code. You know, I was 7 years old, and we had a Spectrum. Anyone have a Spectrum? Yeah, a few. It was amazing, right? Like, I remember my dad showing me this thing called BASIC, and you could, you know, I think my first program was something like, you know, type 10, go to line 20, do whatever, print some screen, right? But it's pretty impressive. And so you go from that the point where you're inspired by art, by code, then you really go through this whole process of learning it. I want to learn more. You grab it wherever you can. And eventually you get to the point where you kind of feel like you've mastered something. And it's a great feeling. And yeah, this book kind of encouraged me to think about how you then pass it on, right? And like I said, the concept of this transformational gift is pretty cool. So, but why bother teaching, right? It seems like a bit of a hassle. There's the old saying, people that can do and people that can't teach, right? So it has this kind of stigma related to it. But I don't think that's really that helpful, and I don't think it's actually true of real life anyway. So in all likelihood, you're teaching every day, whether you kind of realize it or not. So, I mean, if you've been working for a while with Ruby, then you've probably experienced the kind of, have you ever seen that curve that people throw out for technology? Like you get the curve, it goes up and then down and then goes up and plateaus. Kind of feels a bit like that in your career, right? You pick up Ruby and you're like, wow, this is amazing. Look at all the cool stuff I can do. Look how, it just kind of feels right. And you're really excited, you do a lot of stuff. And then you kind of go through this valley of disappointment when you realize all the things it can't do. You think, oh maybe, you just get frustrated with it, right? Like, you look at all the cool languages that come through, you go, oh, look at Elixir, look what it can do, or Clojure, or things like this. But maybe now you've gone through that and you're headed to this plateau of productivity where you can just get stuff done. But you might be at the point now that you've lost that excitement, that initial excitement you had when you were first discovering Ruby, when you were, finding new things that you could do with it. And you feel like you can get stuck in a bit of a rut. Because you have to, we have deadlines, right? We're all building stuff for people. So you've got to get stuff done. You can't always afford to be learning a new way of doing something all the time, right? So I believe that teaching is a great way of getting out of that rut. But more than just teaching, but being intentional about our teaching. Because, like I said earlier, I think we are doing stuff every day. You probably, if you're working within a team environment, you're probably teaching, just over coffee, right? You're talking about, oh yeah, hey guys, I figured how to do this. We could do it this way. Perhaps when you pair programming, or even contributing to open source. I always think everything kind of feels like it's a form of teaching, when you're commenting on someone's pull request. If for nothing else, I would encourage you to think about teaching everything you know for pure selfish reasons, because I believe it'll make you a better developer. So there's a few ways and a few reasons why I think it does make you better. And the first one is that it forces you to learn, right? Nothing motivates you more. I mean, maybe I'm generalizing, but nothing motivates me more than having to stand in front of someone and talk about it, right? Like, right now. It's pretty good motivation to be conscientious and detail-oriented. I mean, in all likelihood, that's your whole life, right? This is the career we've chosen. We've chosen to work with computers. Generally, that's the kind of person it attracts, right? So by saying, I'm gonna teach this, I need to feel like I need to know it inside out. It's kind of not always true, right? You don't always need to know everything perfectly, but it's good motivation. The second thing that I think is great is thinking like a beginner is an important skill that the more you code, the more you get on in anything in life, right? The further away you get from that introduction you had to the skill, the language, whatever, the less you remember of how hard it was at the start. I've been teaching, doing some teaching for General Assembly in London. One of the classes I've been running has been Introduction to Ruby on Rails. Now, you know, probably most of us use Ruby on Rails to a large degree in our day job. But have you, like, do you remember what it was like when you first started? Have you ever tried to help someone get installed? Like, first time, get their dev environment set up? And you realize, like, how awful that is. Like, it's pretty hard. Like, say for us as developers, stuff goes wrong, you go, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, do that. And you kind of, it's all in there, it's all in your head, you've kind of forgotten at what point, like, nobody knows, like, that wasn't always in your head, you know? But whereas for people coming to it fresh, just like, they're like, what? How do I do this? It just doesn't make sense. And it's actually a really good thing to feel like that. It's frustrating. Like, I've been doing some work in Clojure recently, and it's really frustrating being a beginner. It's like, you know, I can do this so easily in Ruby. How do I do this? And I love the fact that it gives you this fresh perspective. It helps you kind of uncover your assumptions that you have about language. And the best way, you know, we'll never truly get back to that point where you feel the frustrations of a beginner, but if you talk with people who are earlier in that journey, it helps you kind of, you know, uncover those parts that you just assumed that everybody knew. So the last point, and probably like the actual main point, why teaching is going to make you better, is because it forces you to articulate your thoughts, or, you know, things that may be even lower than your thoughts, those subconscious things that you kind of just do. But being able to articulate them is a powerful thing. Again, like explaining things to other people is a really great tool. So have you ever explained to anybody, you know, why instance variables in our Rails controllers are either a good or a bad thing? Like, this is kind of one of those things that people just do. Like, they take a position on either side of that, and they'll just go, yeah, this is the right way. But when you actually articulate it, kind of really get down to the reasons why you believe that. And I think that's going to be good for you to be able to write better code, because you suddenly have words behind the way you do it. So I'd like to talk, a little bit now about how we learn. Just dive a little bit into the psychology of learning. There's not going to be any code slides in this, by the way, guys, so hopefully that's okay with you. But, you know, well, let's just talk about this psychology thing. So, I read a book by a guy called Tim Ferriss. You might have heard of him. He's got this recent book called The 4-Hour Chef. And yeah, it's pretty cool. Like, teaches it. You might have seen his previous work. But this 4-Hour Chef book, there's a section in it about learning, which is really cool. It talks about like meta-learning, his approach to learning stuff, and how he breaks it down, how he's able to identify what's important in a skill, and how he kind of effectively hacks that and to learn something in the shortest period of time. I think it's a good thing for us to have. Well, it's a good perspective to have, actually, to look at how he's doing things here. And he talks about narrowing down material to what is actually important, right? He's talking about it in the context of cookery, but he goes through a whole bunch of different examples. And he talks about how, you know, learning a language like Japanese, how he was able to take, you know, there's a lot to learn there. He kind of condensed it into, I think, something like 1,900 characters that he needed to learn. And he talked about how he then condensed that into something smaller so that he could learn it in a quicker time. So, and the reason why he was doing it around frequency in terms of what was able to going to have the maximum impact for him. So there was this idea between efficiency and effectiveness. Just because you're efficient doesn't mean you're actually, doing the best, right? Effective is like doing the right thing versus like doing things well, or doing things right, sorry. So he talks about this, and he calls it the minimum effective dose. And it's applied across all his kind of things that he talks about, like from his bodybuilding through, he talks about like sports things, languages. And he actually breaks it down into this acronym that he calls DIS, which is, talks about deconstructing at skill, talks then about selecting what's the most important, what's the highest frequency things. Then he talks about sequencing. So getting things in the right order that you need to learn these things in, because things do have an order, right? And then he talks about the schedule. So again, that's important when it comes to teaching, that the way we schedule the learning. And the schedule is important because it determines how likely we are to stick to something. So the schedule and subject matter are going to help us reach fluency in something. So I'd recommend checking it out. I mean, that's a very brief kind of discussion of what he does. And let me talk to you about some other psychological parts of learning. So you might be familiar with like these schools of thought, that there are 3 types of learning styles. So people either are auditory learners, visual, or kinesthetic, which is fancy words for hearing, seeing, and doing, right? So it's important whenever situation we're in to kind of think about those things. Now, like I said, everybody's going to be a mix of things. I don't think anybody's a single type, right, of learner. But I think the beauty of what we do naturally lends itself to all these things, particularly in like team environments when we're working together with other people, whether it's like one-on-one pair programming or whether we're in a wider team setting. That generally we're not going to be doing a single thing. We're going to be talking about code. We're going to be perhaps typing it at the same time. We're doing something, or we're watching someone else do it. So there are a few things that psychologists would talk about when it comes to teaching. So there's this thing about failure and belief. So motivation is reduced if individuals, so if people attribute failure to a lack of ability rather than a lack of effort. So it's important to know that we're not stupid, right? that demotivates people. But if they just feel like, hey, you know what? If I just try it again, if I just, you know what? Okay, I didn't get it this time, but I can come back if I try a little bit harder. The motivation lasts longer, it's stronger. So recent research has demonstrated that students' ability to remember and retrieve information is greater when we spread things out over time rather than concentrate it intensively. So again, lends itself well in our team settings, right? And so that, we're not all constantly just going, we're only going to train once, and that's it, like, let's cram everything. But within a team, when you're working together, generally it is over time, right, that we learn stuff, that we teach stuff, that we share ideas. The next is something called the generation effect. So people more effectively remember things when they generate their own answers, so not when they see the answer on a page. Probably not surprising, right? You might have experienced this yourself. Like, it's but it gives it a name, right? And it helps you articulate it. Next is like an instructor that seeks to stretch people and broaden understanding by identifying those things that are just out of reach of the person they're teaching, the student. That's a really important way of learning. Because after all, we don't know what we don't know. Okay, so it's great having the mentor who can help you push just beyond those limits of what you already know. So, and then we have this self-awareness, or it might be termed metacognition, and it's just basically knowing your own thought processes. And effectively, it's like how it's written down here. I've actually written down it. It helps students avoid distractions, sustain effort, and modify their learning strategies based on their awareness of how effective they're being. And ways you can kind of encourage this is by asking reflective questions, or recounting your thought processes as you go through a problem. Or, in other words, we would probably talk about this in the developer duck, right? Just being able to talk through the problem. It's like, hey, I can't fix this. Can you come over and help me? And as you explain the problem, as you explain what you've been trying to do, yeah, thanks, fixed it. And like the guy's there, oh yeah, right. Didn't say anything. So, yeah, I mean, they're kind of some of the psychology things to kind of keep in mind, actually, as we're teaching. And let me throw in this thing. I also recently read Brett Victor. He did this blog post about learnable programming. I don't know if you read it or saw it. It was pretty good, and he was building on one of his previous talks. You might have seen, I forget the name now. But he was talking about this whole idea about being able to see the result of what you're writing. And he had this actual statement that I kind of quite liked, was talking about how programming was not a rote skill to be learned, and that we shouldn't be teaching people for loops, for instance. That's kind of beside the point. We like teaching people actually the underlying concepts versus actually talking about grammar or vocabulary. We're teaching people about the whole computer science is much more important than just going, how he describes it is, we don't describe a book and say, look, it's got these words, it's got magnificent and amazing in it. That's just describing, it's not actually not helpful for describing a book, right? So I would like to talk, just briefly then, talk about how we would actually go about teaching. So we've talked a little bit about psychology. We talked a little bit about, this concept of teaching being this transformational gift. But how actually how do we pass on that gift, right? So, firstly, teaching is a lot about communication. And one of the fundamental parts is crafting our message. So, regardless of your experience and your level that you feel you're at as a developer, as an engineer, or however you describe yourself, I believe that everybody has something that they can say, something that they can teach. There's something unique about what your experience in code and in the domains that you're working in that is not repeated in other people. So then how do we take that message and how do you deliver it in a way that is easy for other people to grasp? And one of the key things that we have when we're delivering a message is trying to speak the language of the person that you're aiming to help. So in the case of, say you're in a team and you're helping a junior developer get on board and helping them develop their skills, it's often not useful to try and talk about things, use languages that maybe they're not familiar with or that's not natural to them. And even talk about it in terms of, talk about it in terms of them and how it benefits them and how they're going to think. In marketing, we might talk about how there's three sections, if you like, to a message. There's often like a pain that people experience, like I can't code, for instance, right? And then there's dream. The dream is the part there, that I would like to be able to do. So I want to be able to build my app in Rails, for instance. And then the fix is where we come in. This is the part that we're teaching, right? This is the thing that we can say, look, I can help you here. And so I often think about every time any kind of message that I'm giving, like whether I'm teaching to a class or teaching in person, like one-on-one, is trying to think about these three things. And it's great because it helps you focus on that person or the people or whoever that you're helping. We're really thinking about, how can I help them? How can I fix this thing that they're experiencing, the pain? So when it comes to in-person teaching, probably one of the most common ways I see that happens is pair programming. Like this is probably the most common knowledge transfer, teaching student kind of situation that I've seen in companies. And mentoring junior members of a team, often this kind of pairing often works really well because it's this thing of going, two people working on the same piece of code and effectively challenging each other about how we do this right. Some of my best experiences in coding has been working with junior developers and them saying, oh, why do we do this? Like, somebody asks you why, it's a powerful thing to actually take stock and go, oh yeah, like this piece of code that I'm writing here, is this actually the best? Can I write this in a better way? So there's that, and then it also within team settings, things when you come to peer review, like if you're using GitHub a lot for your development process, like again, a lot of companies that I work with do use pull requests heavily. These are great places again for effectively the same thing, right? We're still talking about code and how we write it better. And then there's something else that I've seen work well is in a team setting, so where there's not just one-on-one, but it's when we come to, have you ever done like mob refactoring before, which is an interesting thing where you basically let a group of people just tear your code apart. It's an interesting way of sharing knowledge on a wider scale. It doesn't work so well, like as in writing lots of code, but in terms of refactoring, keeping people on the same page, it's really good. And then there's also the community aspect of it. And there's lots of ways that we can get involved in the community. And I think here in Sydney, there's InstallFest. Again, helping that perennial problem for beginners getting involved in Rails is how do I get set up? Rails Girl, like it's big in London. I don't know how it is in here, but there's a great community there in London. I imagine the same here. Also, like I said, open source. Getting involved in open source is a great way of sharing what you know. And not only that, though, when you put yourself out there saying, I think this is a good way, a better way of doing that, it opens you up to other people saying, yeah, great, but how about this as well? Then there's another part of teaching, and I think it's actually a really universal way of teaching and really effective, is by writing. So it's, like I said, while it's universal, I don't think it's necessarily the easiest, because writing well is not necessarily easy. But in terms of being able to just get it out there, and the forms of distribution are great. And I'd like to give you a few ideas of things that you can write about, things that you can talk about in your teams. Like when I say write, it doesn't necessarily have to be, this is writing something for the whole world, but writing within your team is a good thing too. But I got some advice from a guy called Rob Fitz. He's in London. He's a dev there, and he actually gave these five pointers of things to write about, and I like them. So first one, he talks about in your last job or project, tell me the mistakes you made and how you plan to avoid them next time. Again, reflecting on things that we've done wrong or things we could do better is a great way of improving ourselves, making sure that we don't just keep writing the same crappy code, but we do strive for something better. Another one is, from the most recent book you read, what one thing stood out to you that you will use to make your code better? Things that I wish I knew 10 years ago. Always an interesting, again, recap of what you've done so far. What have your clients, partners, or customers asked or been confused by recently? And finally, what's the worst advice you've heard recently? Everyone loves a good flame war, right? Be opinionated. I think that's one great thing about teaching is being opinionated. Saying, you don't have to say I know all the answers, but just say I think this is a good thing. Something I try and do is every time I fix an error, find a bug that I couldn't Google. We have those right now and again. Please blog about it because someone else is Googling for the same thing. Most likely, it will be you in 6 months' time when the thing doesn't work. So you'll thank yourself. Also, I think something very powerful is writing a style guide for your team. Again, it's about articulating. It's about taking the choices that you've made or making in your team, whether it's in your Ruby style guide or it's your HTML and CSS style guide, but being specific about, this is how we do stuff. This is how we structure our services in our app, or this is how we structure how we hit our queues and things like that, or whatever you're doing. The reasoning behind 2 spaces versus 4 spaces in your tabs and things like that. But whatever it is, articulating it, knowing the reason why you're doing it is good. Then, lastly, I would encourage you to speak as well. Firstly, within your team, talk about stuff, right? Find things that that you would like to learn about, for instance, and then give a lunchtime talk. Don't just. I think it would be tragic if everything that you know, everything that you've done, remained in your head and never shared with other people. And go and speak at your local Ruby meetups. So we've got places here, Melbourne. I know you've got meetups there, and I'm sure most cities have a local Ruby user group, and I'm sure they're always looking for, if they're anything like back home, they're looking for more speakers. So yeah, I hope I can encourage you to be intentional about your teaching. And just to, like I say, teaching is not for the people who know everything, but teaching is, I believe, for everybody. And there's so much to gain when you teach everything you know that, like I said, I think you should go for it. So thank you for your time today, and I hope you have a great RubyConf.
Thank you very much, Felix. Hello. Oh, there we go. We've got time for, I think, one question. And we've got a question. There we go.
Thank you, Felix. Just a quick question. What parts of Ruby have you found that beginners most often stumble over, and how have you helped them over those lumps?
Yeah, so I think the tricky part of that is that people don't approach Ruby often on its own. People come to Ruby through Rails because generally they want to do something, right? And it's web development is the hook. And Rails is huge. because it's not just Ruby. Like if it was just Ruby, that would be okay. You're teaching a language, but we're actually saying we're teaching, HTML, CSS. They need to learn about, request and response, and it's all very confusing. So I think that's like one of the biggest stumbling points is people try and do the whole, and I think that's why it's important to narrow things down and talk about, what can I teach in that's high frequency? What's the most important thing they can learn? Whether that's, cranking things back and saying, don't focus on HTML, CSS, because that's a whole other world anyway, right? But learn Ruby as a language in itself might be a better approach for people.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Felix. Everyone, Felix Clark.